Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I like to discuss the reports that the Packaging Federation now are saying that it's too late to avoid shortages at their end this Christmas, no matter what belated moves the government now make. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So if the pandemic has taught us anything about Boris Johnson's government and how it will deal with Brexit, it would have been that whenever a crisis looms, nothing will be done until the consequences are so clear to the general public that they are forced to act. But once a crisis is clear to the general public, it has been building for some time. You know, there just doesn't seem to be any such thing about being proactive in order to avoid likely or even inevitable outcomes. Christmas retail is, of course, massive business. Even if it weren't obvious, I can tell you as a YouTuber, traditionally the rates we get for ads on our channel increase massively over the last 4 months of the year. And then they drop off a cliff once Christmas is over. It's really stark. Advertisers are blowing their budgets in the run-up to late December. So it also stands to reason that it takes a lot of planning to be ready for the festive season. Some businesses are making virtually all of their profits at that time of the year, and they need to begin nice and early to get ready for it. Some of them begin at the start of the year. But anyone expecting to meet massive demand will certainly need a big build-up. You know, we were told about food producers that they start preparing for Christmas in summer. You know, they were already 6 weeks behind by the time the national media started reporting shortages as shortages. You know, the government still did nothing. Very late on in the day, the government finally agreed to issue 5,000 visas for HGV drivers, as well as a few other things. You know, the government announced this week that has resulted in 20 suitable drivers coming forward. 20. That's it. There's no argument now about, oh, is it 27 or is it 127? There's only 20 actual drivers taking up these visas. That's not exactly going to deal with the problem. Frankly, it wasn't anyway. Even if we'd had the full take-up, it wasn't enough, and it wasn't for long enough. But 20 is a spectacular embarrassment. Or is it? Part of me looked at it and at face value and thought, well, this is just humiliating for the government, who try and tell us, along with the other Brexiteers, that people are desperate to come into this country to work, you know, when they opened the supposed floodgates to immigration, permitting a mere 5,000 in, and they only got 20 wanting to. Like, Brexit ideology is looking more than a little silly right now. But then another part of me was wondering if the government did this deliberately. If their ideology was stronger than their desire to fix the mess, and they deliberately agreed to a visa scheme that they knew would fail so that they could say, well, we tried. So when the problems mount higher and journalists start doing their jobs and asking the real questions, the government can say, yeah, well, immigration clearly isn't the answer because we offered these 5,000 visas, only 20 were ever used. You know, they can then bounce the problem back to the employers. You know, I've said this before, but the saying, never attribute to malice that which can be explained by incompetence, doesn't really work with Brexit often. You know, because everything can be explained by incompetence, everything they do. And no doubt sometimes this is the cause. But you cannot have a government this incompetent and still be in power. Some of it has to be malice. It's so hard to pick it apart. But on this occasion, I think it was just incompetence, because then there was a sudden move on cabotage, which is evidence of that. But I'm going to discuss that in the next video. Now, we've already issued visas for other workers, more directly in the food production sector. Butchers, most recently. Again, far too late. Pig farmers were warning of the problem ages ago, and the government did nothing. The media are now saying, the government have issued these visas to get butchers in before there's the need for the cull of these healthy pigs. The cull of these healthy pigs has already started. It's going on right now. It's happening. You know, they've issued the visas for butchers too late. You know, now I'm not sure if this is going to get better results than for the lorry drivers as well. I suspect it will, actually, as butchers don't have to deal with a lot of the nonsense that lorry drivers do, I suppose. You know, for the right pay, it might well work. But it's still too late. This should have been done when there was time to avert the crisis, not when the crisis already happened. Sure, yes, you can say better late than never, but it should have been done on time. The government knew that it needed to do this. It's not supposed to wait until the crisis has already hit. And now the chief executive of the Packaging Federation, Dick Searle, is reported to have said the government should have reacted to shortages that they've got a long time ago, and that packing shortages for Christmas are now inevitable. That's it. That's all there is to it. He did say they'd also be temporary, unlike some of the other Brexit shortages we're enduring. But packaging is, of course, an essential element of the food production chain. It's all right having the food. If you can't package it, it's not getting to the supermarket shelves, is it? So we have problems at the actual production end, problems at the processing end, problems at the packaging end, and between every single stage, you've also got a need for transport where there are still massive problems, because getting an extra 20 drivers isn't helping. 20 drivers isn't even one per county in Britain, is it? And there are also shortages in retail itself. Though I don't know that this is having any serious impact on things. Supermarkets seem to be managing to get enough staff, even if it's not as many as they would ideally like at the time. And Searle did mention the shortage of, say, aluminium cans. Okay, that's partly down to the switch from plastic, which resulted in a huge demand at a time when there was no margin to cope. Another one of these factors that isn't Brexit itself, but it creates shortages because it's aggravated by Brexit. Absolute classic example. As part of environmental measures, encouragement to switch from plastic to aluminium cans for drinks, great. That creates more demand for aluminium. Okay, as expected. But then you add in the shortage of lorry drivers, so you can't supply that, you can't meet that demand. So that's when you get the shortages. Absolute classic case of how we create a pressure point in the system, which would have happened with or without Brexit, but the thing that stops us coping is Brexit. That's what people need to understand. Brexit is what stops us coping with these pressures that are always going to be there. There's always going to be some pressure there. This is why, despite all these global pressures that the gammons keep banging on about, no other country is suffering these shortages because they can all manage the pressure. They also have the same pressures, but they have the capacity to cope. Brexit stops us having the capacity to cope. We isolated ourselves from the global network. It got a bit worrying when he said, Silfella, that the public have a key role in managing this. Basically, don't stockpile is his message. You're having a laugh, right? I mean, I've actually been impressed so far that panic buying of food and drink hasn't been taking place. To be fair, there hasn't been a panic level being raised in the newspapers, which probably explains it. Because on the one hand, it annoys me when the media don't explain the full reasons behind our shortages, because it means those shortages aren't going to be solved until they do, because the government don't want to solve them until they're forced to. But on the other hand, at least they're not being sensational about it, like they did with the petrol situation. Unusual restraint from them, quite frankly. But the public will never all independently decide to behave themselves for some greater good. No population would. A large society needs careful coordination by a benevolent and wise government. We don't have one of those. At the first hint of real shortages, the panic buying will take place. If we're relying on the general public here, we are buggered. And it's not just aluminium cans, cardboard also an issue, big issue. Because obviously with the pandemic, more people working at home, being at home, there's more people ordering things for the home to reset it up, to get it ready for their new pattern of life. So there are a lot more deliveries to homes. More cardboard used. That means we need more lorries to collect the cardboard from recycling centres in order to turn it into the next generation of cardboard packaging. But we have a shortage of these lorries, you see. So we're struggling to keep up. Hence, we're going to have a shortage of cardboard food packaging as well. Searle said that the amount of cardboard needed for our current demand does exist in the country. It's absolutely there, he says. We just can't get it distributed. He also said the process of reprocessing was energy intensive. I didn't need him to tell me that, okay, we've got much higher energy costs right now. Because if you think your household bills have gone up a lot, remember that they are capped. Business energy rates are not. So they are really taking the brunt of this. So the cost of producing cardboard is also increasing significantly, as well as having reduced access to the raw materials they need to process it. And I feel I have to point this out yet again, that what we're seeing here are new crises piling onto existing ones, making the whole thing much more difficult to deal with. In the last week, I've discussed multiple new Brexit aggravated crises that did not exist last week. They were in the works, they were expected, but they hadn't actually hit. They have now. The previous ones had not, and are still not being dealt with. And I do not know if the visas issued for food processing will be successful, like butchers and so on. I do know that they're only short term anyway. Now, packaging issues may be a temporary issue, but food production issues are not. So regardless of how well any part of the government's visa scheme or any other scheme goes, and it's clearly flopped for lorry drivers, we will still be in the same mess next year. And these crises are going to keep happening. There's always going to be global crises, always. There are still several predictable ones underway that the public aren't too aware of right now. And then what happens if something actually genuinely unexpected happens again? Like we had with the gas shortage. And I'm still wondering what happens if bad winter weather hits Britain before the end of the year. I mean, I'd certainly worry for the parts of Britain where it's very likely, like Scotland, almost certain parts of the north of England and Wales, usually susceptible too. But what if it hits the precious Tory heartlands? Can you imagine a winter like the one we had in 2010 hitting amongst all this mess? But never mind that now. We've got enough to worry about with certain crises, and the biggest crisis of all is the fact that we've got a government like we have. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.